Every town has its secrets, but the one tucked inside this small rural neighborhood was more chilling than fiction. 4 months, peaceful families went to bed unaware that the soft lullabies playing in the distance weren't coming from a baby monitor, but from a killer preparing to strike. It started with the sound of a song, soft, almost sweet. A lullaby drifting through the night air like a ghost from a forgotten past. No one in the neighborhood paid much attention at first. It was just a faint melody, barely audible unless the night was especially still. Maybe someone had a newborn. Maybe it was an old radio left on. That's what people told themselves. But the truth was far more disturbing. The first body was found on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun had begun to rise. It was a teenage girl, no older than 17, discovered lying in the middle of her neatly made bed. There was no sign of forced entry. No blood. No struggle. Just her pale figure, eyes gently closed as if she drifted off peacefully and never woke up. On the nightstand, placed precisely in the center, was a small wind-up music box. Its silver ballerina spun slowly to a haunting tune, Brahms' Lullaby. The autopsy found no signs of trauma, no evidence of overdose, nothing to suggest what had killed her. It was like her life had been switched off. That was the part that disturbed the detectives most. Even the forensics team struggled to make sense of it. A toxicologist was called in, thinking perhaps a rare sedative had been used, but the tests all came back negative. As quietly as she had lived, she had simply ceased to be. The town mourned her death, but soon the buzz faded. Tragedies come and go. The world keeps turning. But 2 weeks later, another body was found. This time it was an elderly man discovered by his caretaker. He was in his recliner, hands folded neatly in his lap, slippers still on, television static buzzing softly in the background. Next to him a music box, different design but same song. Brahms' Lullaby. That was when whispers began. It wasn't just the music boxes. Neighbors reported hearing lullabies at night, sometimes faint, other times clearly from just beyond their bedroom windows. One woman swore she heard footsteps outside her house shortly after the music faded, but when she turned on the porch light, there was nothing there. Another family claimed their baby monitor picked up the song even though the device wasn't connected to anything. The police initially dismissed it as paranoia. Towns grieve in strange ways. Rumors spiral. But when the third body was found, a mother of 2 who worked nights and always locked every door behind her, the pattern became undeniable. The same death-like sleep. The same lack of violence. And always, the lullaby. The community went into lockdown. Parents kept their children close. Local hardware stores sold out of locks, motion sensors, and cameras within hours. But no matter what they did, it didn't stop the music. It was the eerie calm of the crime scenes that got under everyone's skin. These weren't chaotic, impulsive murders. They were rituals, deliberate, quiet, and terrifyingly clean. Every music box was antique, delicately placed. Every victim showed no signs of fear. It was as if they were lulled into trusting whoever had been there, or were simply too sedated to resist. Detectives poured through local antique shops and online listings, searching for a source of the boxes. They interviewed collectors, music historians, even consulted experts in vintage musical mechanisms. Nothing concrete emerged. Each box was unique, different engravings, different materials, but always played the same haunting tune. Desperation crept into the investigation. For every step forward there seemed to be 2 back. Surveillance footage caught nothing. Entry points were undetectable. No fingerprints, no DNA, no digital trail. Whoever the killer was, he moved like smoke through walls, always one step ahead. People began to believe he lived among them, someone who watched from the shadows, waiting for night to fall and the silence to begin. Late one evening, a local dog began howling uncontrollably. Its owner, a retired schoolteacher, went outside with a flashlight to check the yard. She didn't find anyone, but her porch swing was swaying gently, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. On the porch railing lay a tiny handwritten note, "Sleep tight." The lullaby played again that night. It became a psychological siege. People slept in shifts. Some moved in with relatives. A few left town entirely. But the killings didn't stop. They simply spread out as if the murderer had widened his hunting ground. Each new victim, regardless of age or gender, was found in a position of calm. Eyes closed. No struggle. Music box nearby. It was his calling card, his comfort, or his curse. Media attention followed, but even they could make little sense of it. Reporters dubbed the killer the Sandman, likening him to the mythical figure who brings dreams, or in this case eternal ones. The name stuck. Fear sank deeper into the community. Each night, as the sun disappeared, a dreadful silence hung in the air, the kind of silence where even the faintest lullaby could send shivers down a spine. And still no one saw him. No one heard him. No one knew when he would strike again. Only the music gave him away. But by the time you heard it, it was already too late. The police had patterns, names, timelines, even a list of music boxes. But they didn't have a face. And every night, the soft lullabies continued to echo through the quiet streets like a twisted invitation. The killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no evidence but his eerie musical tokens. The victims were random, or so it seemed at first. Young, old, male, female, it didn't matter. But Detective Lena Reyes couldn't shake the feeling that there was a pattern. It just wasn't on the surface. She started going back through everything they had. Crime scene photos, coroner's reports, even obscure case notes that had been dismissed as irrelevant. Then she noticed something chilling. Every single victim had a connection to an old orphanage that had burned down 15 years ago just outside town. It wasn't obvious. Some had volunteered there. Others had adopted children from it. A few had grown up near it. One victim had even been the daughter of a former staff member. It was buried in details no one had thought to link. But Lena did. She dug into the records of the orphanage, St. Magnolia's home for children. It had a long history of complaints. Understaffed, underfunded, and frequently accused of neglect. But the building itself was gone, destroyed in an unexplained fire that killed 5 children and a nurse. Only a few records survived and most of the staff had moved away. But Lena found one name that kept surfacing in bits and pieces: Michael Harlan. He had been a quiet child, frequently disciplined for behavioral issues. According to one surviving report, he was obsessed with music boxes and would often hum lullabies during nap time, even when the other children were silent. There were no official records of what happened to Michael after the fire. No adoption file. No death certificate. It was like he vanished. But Lena had a sinking feeling that Michael had never really left. She managed to find a retired social worker who remembered him. The woman, now elderly and nearly blind, recalled the fire in broken whispers. Michael, he wasn't like the other kids, she said. Didn't talk much. Always listening to something only he could hear. After the fire, the others swore they saw him walking out of the smoke, dragging one of those music boxes. But they said his face, his eyes, something was wrong with him. Trauma has a way of shaping monsters. Lena began to piece together Michael's life after the fire. A foster family briefly took him in, but the placement ended abruptly after disturbing behavior was reported. The parents never spoke of it again. Another home, another exit. Then nothing. A dead trail. But Lena suspected he hadn't disappeared. He had simply learned to live in the cracks of society. Unseen. Unwanted. And now possibly unhinged. Psychologists brought into the case built a chilling profile. Michael, or whoever the killer truly was, had likely developed a delusional association between music boxes and safety. To him, the lullaby wasn't just music. It was control. Power. When he was a child surrounded by chaos, it was the one thing that made him feel calm. Now, as an adult twisted by grief and rage, he used it as a ritual to recreate that feeling, by stealing peace from others in their final moments. The killer wasn't just murdering randomly. He was choosing people connected to that orphanage, consciously or not. Anyone who represented the system that failed him, that let him burn without saving him. The lullaby was his way of reclaiming what was stolen. His innocence, his voice, his childhood. It made him feel like the one in charge, finally able to decide who got to sleep and who didn't wake up. Lena realized he wasn't doing it to be seen. In fact, the faceless nature of his crimes made perfect sense. He didn't want fame. He wanted silence. He wanted the world to sleep the way he never could. The murders were his bedtime stories, carefully crafted and deeply personal. But even monsters have patterns. And Lena found the next name on his likely list, a former volunteer named Daniel Ashcroft, who now worked as a school counselor 2 towns over. He had helped rescue children from the fire, but his name appeared in a buried complaint by Michael's original caseworker. Apparently, Ashcroft had argued against keeping Michael at St. Magnolia's, claiming the boy needed psychiatric care. His recommendation was ignored. If Michael had seen Ashcroft as one more adult who gave up on him, he was likely next. They placed Ashcroft under protective surveillance, but Lena knew better than to assume they were ahead of the killer. He was smart, methodical, and invisible. The only advantage they had now was insight into his mind. A mind that lived between lullabies and fire, between silence and screams. Every music box he left behind was a message. And if they read them correctly, maybe, just maybe, they could predict where the next one would be placed. But time was running out. And the lullaby was still playing. It was close to midnight when the lullaby returned. Daniel Ashcroft sat in his living room, fingers trembling as he tightened the belt of his robe. The television glowed faintly, but the volume was muted. Outside, the world was still, unnaturally so. No wind, no passing cars, not even the hum of insects. Just silence. And then, it started. Faint and delicate, the music drifted through the air. Brahms' Lullaby. The exact same tune heard at every scene. It wasn't coming from inside the house, but from somewhere close. Daniel rose, inching toward the window, heart pounding. A music box stood on the porch, slowly turning on its own. No one was visible. But someone had been there. Recently. Within minutes, the house was surrounded. Lena Reyes and a team of officers swept the property, but the killer had already vanished, leaving behind only the tune. They were too late again. Or so they thought. Lena noticed something different this time. The music box had a hidden compartment underneath, which contained a small, scorched photograph, barely legible, but it showed a group of children in front of a building. The building was unmistakable, St. Magnolia's. And one of the children, barely more than a shadow in the corner, had the unmistakable outline of a music box in his hands. This wasn't just a warning. It was a signature. And more importantly, it was personal. Lena realized something then. The killer was escalating. He was no longer content to remain in the shadows. He wanted them to know he was close. He wanted the fear to build. This wasn't a final act, it was a prelude. They doubled Ashcroft's security. Plainclothes officers patrolled the area. Lena herself refused to leave the scene. But that night, the lullaby played again, this time from inside the house. The sound came from the attic. Ashcroft hadn't been up there in years. It was a storage space filled with old boxes and dusty furniture. The officers stormed in, guns drawn, but again, nothing. Just a small hand-cranked music box sitting atop an old suitcase. Its ballerina spun in perfect silence as if daring them to touch it. But the attic window was cracked open. Just wide enough for someone to slip in, or out. The killer had been there. Right above them. Watching. Listening. That changed everything. The psychological profile had to be updated. He wasn't just choosing people at random or out of vengeance anymore. He was performing. He was toying with them. With Lena. With Ashcroft. With the entire investigation. The lullabies weren't just rituals, they were games. And each one brought him closer. Lena couldn't sleep. Could barely think. She stayed at headquarters late into the night, poring over the case files again, until she found something she'd missed. One of the original music boxes had a serial number etched inside, barely visible under the winding mechanism. It wasn't a manufacturer code. It was a date, May 14, 2010. The night St. Magnolia's burned down. She checked the rest of the boxes. Every single one had a date hidden in it. And when she placed them in chronological order, the dates matched key moments in the killer's life. The fire, the foster placements, school expulsions, psychiatric holds. The boxes weren't just tokens. They were a timeline. And the final date was tomorrow. She didn't know what it meant. But it couldn't be ignored. At dawn, a letter arrived at the station addressed to Lena. Inside was a single sentence written in careful cursive. When the music stops, so does the pain. It was signed simply, M. She knew what he meant. The lullaby would end after one final act. A final murder. The pain he'd carried for years would finally be passed on in full. And Lena knew who he'd saved for last. It made sense. She was the only one who'd ever gotten close. She had seen the pattern, touched the memories, dared to follow the melody back to its origin. He hated her for it, and respected her all the same. That night she refused to be anywhere else. She stayed in her home, lights off, blinds open. Waiting. At exactly 3:07 a.m. she heard it. The lullaby. It didn't come from outside. It came from her bedroom. She moved slowly, gun drawn. The door was ajar. The music floated gently into the hallway like a dream. She stepped in. He was there. Not masked. Not armed. Just standing near her dresser, watching the music box turn. His face was pale, eyes sunken but oddly calm. Like he had made peace with what was coming. In his hands he held one final box. Unfinished, wood raw, no design. This one wasn't meant for a victim. It was his. I thought, he said softly, if I could make them sleep, I could stop hearing them scream. Lena said nothing. Her finger hovered near the trigger. I didn't want to hurt them, he whispered. But they were all part of it. They let it burn. He stepped closer. You figured it out. That means you see it. You see me. Lena stared into his eyes, haunted, fractured, full of a child's pain trapped in a man's rage. Then suddenly he placed the box on the floor and sat beside it. He didn't run. Didn't fight. He simply closed his eyes and let the music stop. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lena had ever heard. Michael Harlan, the Sandman, was taken into custody without resistance. But in the days that followed, none of the investigators could forget the final moment. The way the lullaby ended, not with a sudden halt but a slow, winding sigh. As if even the music had grown tired. And in the darkness of that final night, the town slept peacefully, for the first time in months.